of the cell membrane, which maintains the cell shape, structure, and movements in the cell membrane. The cytoskeleton of the cells. Okay, the cytoskeleton of the cells that maintain the structure, that help to maintain the structure and the the movements of the organelles, all are because of this. So these include there are three types. First are the microtubules. The microtubules are made up of protein called as tubulin. Okay, they are made up of proteins called as tubulin. And what is their function? They form mitotic spindles. They form mitotic spindles. And they provide tracks for the movement of organelles. Provide tracks for the movement of organelles, right? So these microtubules made up of tubulin, and very important is they form mitotic spindles. Then second are the microfilaments. Microfilaments, which are made up of actin. Okay, they are made up of actin. Microfilaments which are made up of actin. And they are present in the microvilli. They are present in the microvilli of intestinal epithelial cells. Microvilli of intestinal epithelial cells. Microvilli. Then the third are called as the intermediate filaments. Intermediate filaments, which are different depending upon the tissues. For example, vimentin, which are in the fibroblast. Then there is cytokeratin in the epithelial cells. Right? So the smallest will be the microfilaments. Smallest will be the microfilaments. Then you must know one thing that is called as molecular motors. What are molecular motors? Yes, Akansha. Yes, correct. Correct, Akansha. Good, beta. Desmin in the muscles. Correct. Akansha, that is correct. Desmin. Okay? Now, what is a term that is molecular motors? So, molecular motors, they are also called as the cargo proteins. They are also called as the cargo proteins. That means, somebody who is taking something on their head and moving and helping out in something. For example, you have got myosin that helps in muscle contraction, we saw. Then kinesin, dynein. And remember, these I taught you when I was teaching you the axonal transport, that is the transport across the neuron. Okay, myosin in muscle contraction. And there is something which is called as dynamin. This dynamin is useful in endocytosis. Dynamin is useful in endocytosis. So these are molecular motors. Okay, so microtubules, intermediate filaments, microfilaments, molecular motors, then the structure of the cell membrane, maximum are proteins to be remembered. Yes, good, good, good. Akansha, very good. So I'm really happy, Akansha, that you are studying well, you are able to recollect. So it's A good weather today, so you need a cup of tea to energize you. Yes, Dynine retrograde. Very good. Now let's look into something which is called as the intercellular junction. Now, this is the cell junctions. Okay, they are the cell junctions. That means how the two cells are connected to each other. So first is you can see that these are the tight junctions. Can you see the tight junctions? So there are two cells. This is one cell, this is another cell. And these are the tight junctions which are holding these two cells. The tight junctions, although are called as tight, but remember that they allow what? They allow substances to be transported across them, but not big substances, only ions. So remember that these tight junctions, they allow ions and water to pass through. And because it is passing between two cells, it is called as a paracellular transport. Paracellular transport. So this kind of transport is very, this kind of transport is very high in your cells which have got tight junctions, like the apical cells, the apical or the luminal border, apical or the luminal border of the intestinal epithelial cells and PCT, of cells of PCT, then the intestinal epithelial cells. Intestinal epithelial cells. Then they are even present in the blood-brain barrier. Okay, so even though we call them as very tight junctions, they are not very tight. They are going to allow ions to pass through it. Okay, not big substances, only ions to pass through it. And they are made up of proteins which are called as occludins. Okay, they are made up of proteins that are called as occludins. So the tight junctions are also called as zona occludins. And therefore the proteins which they are passed or made up of is occludin, and claudin. Occludin and claudin. Then these are the desmosomes which are present, half ridges, half ridge and half ridge. These desmosomes are made up of proteins called as cadherins. Desmosomes are made up of proteins called as cadherins. They are present in the skin and in the cardiac muscle. In the skin and in the cardiac muscle. That means where there is lots of stretching, okay, where there is lots of stretching, they are present in those areas. Then hemidesmosomes, you can see hemidesmosomes, they connect the cell to the underlying basal lamina. They connect the cell to the basal lamina. So they're going to be present everywhere. So what we saw is the desmosomes, then the tight junctions. Desmosomes are also called as macula adherens. Desmosomes are also called as the macula adherens. Okay, desmosomes are also called as the macula adherens. Then very important are these gap junctions. So the gap junctions, okay, ऊपर लिख रही हूँ मैं या यहीं पर लिख देती हूँ. The gap junctions are actually cytoplasmic channels. Okay, the gap junctions are actually cytoplasmic channels. They are connecting the cytoplasm of two cells. The gap junctions are also called as cytoplasmic channels. And they not only, transmit solutes, but even electrical impulses, right? They are not only transmitting solutes but electrical impulses across the between two cells. And remember, they are made up of 6 subunits called as connexons. So ye yaad rakhna, like there is a pore in the center. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And these 6 subunits are there, which are called as connexons. क्या देख के वापस कर देना 2 मिनट में, हम इसको मत छेड़ना, 2 मिनट देख ले एक बारी. Okay, so cytoplasmic channels which transmit solutes, electrical impulses, 6 subunits which are called as connexons. So if you hear the word connexons, remember that is related to our gap junctions. Okay, so this is intercellular junction, how the two cells are connected to each other. Zona occludens, macula adherens, hemidesmosomes and connexons. Because if the connection is not good, then it is again pathological. Now there is something which is called as intercellular communication. This question was there, for NEET PG last year. So first is autocrine. Autocrine means what? This is a cell. Okay. This cell is secreting some substances. It is secreting some substances, and the substances, they act on the same cell. They act on the same cell. Example, your prostaglandins. So they act on the same cells from where they are secreted. They act on the same cell where they are getting secreted from. Second important which you should know is paracrine. Paracrine means, suppose this is one cell, this is another cell. So this cell is secreting and this is acting on neighboring cell. It is acting on neighboring cell. Okay, so this is paracrine. Examples of paracrine are nitric oxide, histamine, then somatostatin. Okay, it is nitric oxide, histamine, somatostatin. So autocrine, paracrine, even if it comes in the form of an image, you should be able to solve it, right? And the next is endocrine. So endocrine to hum log dekhenge, isn't it? Endocrine, we will see what is endocrine. In the endocrine, which are the specialty that endocrine has to be secreted into the blood and carried away to the target tissues. They don't act on the same tissue like thyroid. Thyroid is coming from the thyroid gland, but it will not act on the thyroid gland. Away from the thyroid gland to the target tissues. Done with this? Ishpreet? Now, the types of channels. Now see, we have seen different types of channels while studying, right? So it is, it is not, okay, sir? It is not very important. I mean, it is not very difficult for you now. Ab tak any problem? Is there any problem up till now? Now, types of channels like we have seen, they can be voltage gated channels. Voltage gated. So we saw voltage gated can be sodium, potassium, calcium. Good, Uttam. That these are voltage gated channels. Then the second type of channels are ligand. Thank you, Uttam and Akansha. Ligand gated channels. Ligand gated means they open with binding of neurotransmitter. Binding of neurotransmitter or hormone. So when the hormone or the neurotransmitter will bind, they will get open. है ना. For example, we saw acetylcholine channels at the level of NMJ, which we called it as nicotinic cholinergic receptors. Apart from this, there can be even mechanosensitive mechanosensitive, that means which open by stretch. These are especially your calcium channels which are present in the smooth muscles. Calcium channels which are present in the smooth muscles, like in the blood vessels. Okay, blood vessels may. When there is a stretch, the calcium channels will open. Okay, so especially the smooth muscles you can remember in the blood vessels. Then there are leaky channels. These leaky channels are maximum for potassium, and this is the leaky channel for potassium that is going to contribute to RMP, that is resting membrane potential. Okay, the leaky channels for potassium that is going to contribute to RMP. Now, like myasthenia gravis, malignant hyperthermia, okay, myasthenia gravis, malignant hyperthermia, they are examples of myasthenia gravis or malignant hyperthermia. These are examples of mutation of channels, and diseases which occur because of mutation of channels. This is the diseases which occur because of the mutations of channels. Similarly, have you ever heard cystic fibrosis or the Bartter syndrome? Cystic fibrosis or the Bartter syndrome. This also we will do. GIT में it will come. Cystic fibrosis. कभी सुना है क्या बेटा? Cystic fibrosis. Then Bartter syndrome. They are also examples of mutation of channels. हाँ, तो उसमें भी क्या प्रॉब्लम होता है कि there is a mutation of channel. Right? They are also examples of mutation of channels. Now we will come across